right, well, my clock is showing 5 p.m. John and Libby, are you comfortable? I know we probably will have a few more people join. Oops, looks like someone's coming online here. Do you want us to give a few more minutes, or hi, Carolyn, nice to see you. Thank you for joining. Oh, you're on mute, John.
Looks like people are joining in fast and furious, so maybe we give it just a few minutes while we can see that people are, trying to connect to audio.
For sure. You know what I'll do in the meantime is I'll just get my screen, I'll start my screen share, and that always kind of mucks everything up for momentarily, so maybe I can get the mucking up part out of the way. Share that. Can I get a thumbs up if my screen is coming across for people with the PowerPoint? Perfect. Okay. Perfect. All right, I'll give to 5:02 and then we'll get started. We have a lot of introduction stuff in the beginning, so we'll be able to loop people in quickly.
All right, so it looks like we have 23 participants. So maybe I think I'm only seeing two people, one person that might not be here yet. That's a quick peek. So yeah, why don't we get started?
Wonderful. John, do you want to do any introduction or do you want me to just jump right in?
Well, I guess I can start with an introduction. Of course, I'm John Coleman. I'm the Director of the Planning, Community and Economic Development Department. Today we have with us Katie Saunders from our consulting company Makers, and also with her is Marcus, and they're going to be leading this CPAT process, and so staff's going to be here to help and add information as we can, but largely it's going to be driven by Katie and Marcus. These meetings are open to the public for viewing. We don't have a public comment period. The people that are on the CPAT have been given access as panelists, so you should be able to access your microphones and speak, and otherwise the other attendees should be muted, and there's not going to be public interaction or public comments during these meetings. We are recording these meetings, and so everybody probably got a notification of that. That's kind of the nuts and bolts behind what we're trying to do. I'm going to let Katie talk about why we're here. I know that's part of her slide presentation, so I'll turn it over to her.
Wonderful. Thank you, John. Appreciate that. Again, I'm Katie Saunders with Makers, and we are, as John just mentioned, leading the climate element. I do want to note that John Phillips from Parametrics is also here tonight and is going to be kind of co-presenting on some of the information. We're working very collaboratively, and Parametrics is leading some of the greenhouse gas emissions work as well. So you're going to be hearing from him tonight as well. So just wanted to note that. And with that, I will get through the get to the meat of what we're going to be talking about tonight. So this is the agenda, and we're going to get to an introduction section in just a second. We really want to kind of get to know who's in the room and understand the perspective of the group a little bit from the beginning. And then I'm going to give, so we'll allow kind of full introductions in a moment, and then I'm going to give an overview of the climate element and the CPAT, and we'll have a chance to kind of ask some questions and make sure there's clarity on what this group is, the role is, and what they're going to be asked to do. and if there are questions about the process. So we really hope for a good discussion. We have a lot of pieces to present, but we are going to stop a lot for questions and information. And the information that we're presenting tonight is sort of a draft stage. So we've been doing a lot of work since the spring to kind of fully understand and assess existing conditions and share. But this group is really the chance for us to ground truth that, to make sure we're considering the local needs. So we anticipate 6 changes to what we're presenting tonight before we take it back to the larger community. So I just wanted to note that up front, and we'll note that again but we think we're on the right track, and we're honing in on some really interesting information to share with you tonight. From there, from that overview, we're going to go into the guiding principles discussion and sort of talk a little bit about what the 2016 comprehensive plan. There was some helpful guidance there as to kind of what the community at that point was seeing in terms of needs for the community to address climate change, and it's a good starting point. But there may be some opportunity to fill that in, and if there are points at which there's decisions to be made as part of this group, some guiding principles to steer those decision points may be helpful. So we'll talk a little bit about that during that discussion. And then from there, we're going to talk, and really the focus of tonight's meeting is the resilience sub-element. We're talking about kind of local assets to make sure we're really understanding what are the key aspects of Anacortes that we need to consider in terms of resilience. And we're going to present what our findings are for the local impacts and make sure that we're kind of accounting for all the pieces in that. So that's really the meat of the heart of what we're talking about today. At the end of the meeting, we're going to briefly touch on the greenhouse gas inventory work. Now, we presented this in more detail, or Parametrics, I should say, presented this in more detail at the City Council presentation, and some of you may have either attended or seen that online. So we're not going to go into detail on that tonight because it's just so much information to cover in one meeting. But we are going to spend a little bit of time at the end making sure that folks, first of all, are aware that that information is available on recording, and really have a chance for you guys to ask some key questions of information that you might need before we start kind of asking questions about that at our next meeting. So that's really the goal. We're not going to get into all the details of the inventory in the last 15 minutes of tonight's presentation, but do want to understand if there are kind of pressing questions or needing clarification from what was presented earlier that you'd want to know before we meet again. So yeah, that's pretty much today's agenda. So I'd like to shift over to introductions, and I am going to pull down the screen share for this just so folks can more easily see questions or see faces, excuse me. But the introduction, we'd just love for folks to kind of share their name, their job title or role in the community, and then kind of give a brief 1 to 2 sentence explanation of why serving on the CPAT is important to you. So I'm going to pull down the screen share momentarily, and I might just and John, the folks I'm seeing on the screen, those are all CPAT. I'm not seeing any members of the public, correct?
You know what? There's a couple, but maybe just for simplicity, I've got a list of people, and
that would be perfect.
why don't I call on people just in the order that they're listed in the list? That
would be perfect if you don't mind.
And it just so happens to start with our Mayor Pro Tem, Carolyn Moulton.
Oh, it looks like you're on mute still. We're not getting sound.
You can come back. We can come back. Sound, yeah.
Next on the list is Mike Mills, and then after that will be Todd.
Okay, testing. Can you hear me?
Yes.
As John said, I'm Mike Mills. I'm a new member to the Planning Commission. My interest in the committee has 2 prongs. One is, as a member of the Planning Commission, I'm heavily involved in the overall comp plan update. And the second is going way back to my undergraduate days. I actually have a degree in bachelor's degree in environmental design from back in the 1970s. So that's me.
All right, thank you. How about Todd Woodard?
Good evening. My name is Todd Woodard. I am the Infrastructure and Resources Executive Director for the Samish Indian Nation. Rather long-winded way of saying I oversee both the planning and the natural resources departments for the tribe. And our interest is to be part of the process to, help make sure that Indigenous interests are also represented as a member of the community here. So thank you for the opportunity to serve.
And with you is also Marcus Campadilli.
Yeah. Hey, Marcus Campadilli, climate adaptation specialist for the Samish Indian Nation. Like Todd said, we're here to make sure that Samish's voice is heard, and excited for the work y'all are doing.
And Warren Tessler, then Crystal.
Yeah, I'm Warren Tessler. I'm a member of the Board of Commissioners at Island Hospital, and certainly as the largest employer in town, we have an interest in managing our environmental impact in all sorts of ways. And I'm also co-chair of the Anacortes Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee, so I guess I hit the active transportation section as well. And again, we have an interest in maximizing non-motorized transportation, making things better that way as well.
All right, thank you. And then Crystal, and then if Andy's on yet, we can go to Andy.
Good evening. My name is Crystal Stedham. I'm the CEO for Skagit Transit, public transportation, and all of our fixed route buses are diesel. So as one of the probably largest emissions emitters in the county, I thought it would be important for us to participate in the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions.
All right, so do we have Andy Wilkin with the Anacortes School District here yet? I know we had some technical difficulties with Andy's contact information earlier, so I apologize. I think that's our fault for not being able to be here. And then how about Sandy Finney and then Matt Gill?
Hi, I'm Sandy Finney. I am Chief Strategy Officer at Community Action of Skagit County. Role in the community, I am a resident property owner, parent of 2 kids in the school system. I'm a landlord, and I am an avid user of the public forest lands and lakes. I like to swim in them. And as far as why serving on the CPAD is important to me, I'm actually here not necessarily in any of those capacities that I just mentioned, but I'm here to try to represent the voice of low-income and marginalized populations in Anacortes as well. So I'm going to do the best I can to try to represent some of the issues that we hear from our community members in Anacortes. Specifically, we serve a lot of people who are seniors, disabled, and a lot of people experiencing homelessness, as well as some families who are trying to get ahead and facing some financial challenges. Thank you.
Matt Gill.
Yeah, hey, Matt Gill, government community affairs manager for the Marathon Refinery out there on March Point. Much like Sandy, everything except the landlord. 2 kids, school-age kids, resident here. Just happy to be on this committee, representing one of the larger economic engines in the city, and we've got a lot of experience and history dealing with greenhouse gases, and in this location, other locations across the country where we do business. So I'm excited to serve and improve what we're doing in Anacortes. Looking forward into the future. Thank you.
Thank you. How about Marlene Finley, followed by Kevin Anderson?
Hi, my name's Marlene Finley. I'm the current board president of Evergreen Islands, a local environmental group that has been around for almost 50 years to protect the saltwater islands in Skagit County. And also we also focus on the built environment as well as the natural environment. We've been very engaged with the critical area ordinance update, the Shoreline Master Program. We're currently working at the state level on the Shoreline Management Act rulemaking to incorporate sea level rise. And this summer, we helped host a sea level rise charrette with representatives from the community. So we're very active, and you'll see us at city council meetings and farmers markets. Thanks for inviting us to represent.
Thank you, Marlene. How about Kevin Anderson?
Hey guys, Kevin Anderson. I'm the environmental department at the Port of Anacortes. The port obviously is right on the water's edge, and a lot of our infrastructure is at risk. So we're into resilience planning, and also we have some sustainability issues that we're working on. Personally, I think this is really important. Gather all the people in town working on these issues so we can have an informed conversation. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. And I see that Andy Wilkin has been able to join us on the phone. Thank you for making it, Andy. We're introducing ourselves, the panelists. If you want to jump in there.
Yeah, sorry, I could hear you guys before, but for some reason it didn't have me logged in right. I'm Andy Wilkin. I'm the facilities and operations supervisor for the Anacortes School District, and I'm always kind of interested in these things. I went to school for renewable energy and wind turbines and stuff like that. So anything like this kind of piques my interest, and plus the school district has a vested interest in all this.
Well, thank you for everybody being able to make it on short notice. We also have several city staff members that are here as adjunct members of the Climate Policy Advisory Team. We have Andy Rayum, who is our Public Works Director. We have John Lunsford, who is our Parks Director. We have myself, the Director of the Planning Community and Economic Development Department. We have Libby Grage, who is our planning manager and is doing the large bulk of the work on the comprehensive plan update. And we have Carl Wolfswinkel with the Senior Activity Center. And and of course, our Chief Bill Harris, our Fire Chief. We had the opportunity to meet with some staff earlier this year, so some staff that attended that meeting, some of this information may be a little bit familiar and has evolved a little bit based on those conversations. And some staff are new tonight that are sitting in, and so they may be weighing in to ground truth some of this information in real time tonight too. So we welcome that. That's the point of this meeting. We want to hear from the community, all members of the community informing this group, as well as staff. Oh, yeah, Carolyn.
Hey, I think this will work now. Great. Okay. Carolyn Moulton, Anacortes City Council. I serve on the Planning Committee, the Public Works Committee, various other committees, also a member, long-term member of the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee with Warren. I am interested in climate personally. I ride my bike everywhere. I try to have a low impact environmentally in most of my life choices. And I'm excited to be the council representative on this team. And I think we have a great group with great diversity of experience in different fields, and that we're all committed to our goals together. So welcome everyone, and looking forward to this whole process. So thanks so much for your time and your energy in this process.
Thank you all. And with that, I will also just say quickly for members of the public joining, I know we're not able to speak with you directly tonight, but very happy to have you sitting in tonight. And really the purpose of this meeting was to make sure we're ground truthing and getting all, making sure our information is entirely up to date and informed before we come back to the larger public. So, but really welcome folks to sit in meetings. We're committed to a transparent process, and really not wanting to share that, but mostly just wanting to make sure we consider all the perspectives before we have that larger event. And we'll be talking about more public events, broader public events later in the meeting. Okay, so with that, I will share the screen again. And so for those of you that attended the open house in, I believe it was June, this is somewhat of a recap, but just for folks that might be new, for more background, what is the climate element? The climate element is a new requirement for comprehensive planning that was passed recently. So communities are sort of starting up for this cycle. And for Anacortes, not all communities have both sub-element requirements, but for Anacortes, it includes two sections: a greenhouse gas emissions reduction sub-element and a resilience sub-element. Now, the word element and sub-element, very planning, technical language, but they're effectively chapters of the larger comprehensive plan. So the key pieces for this is there are sort of two sections of the climate element that is required for Anacortes. And tonight, as I mentioned earlier, we're really going to be focusing on the resilience side. So is there a question? Oh, maybe it was just feedback from my microphone. And then another piece that I wanted to call out here is in addition to these, the kind of two sub-elements, there are also requirements for communities to advance environmental justice and avoid environmental health disparities as part of that work. And the text on the right is kind of pulled from the regulation to kind of give you a sense of what the scope is there. It's not obviously the entire text, but just gives you a sense of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and avoiding those adverse impacts. And that is a key role for this CPAT group, what we're calling CPAT just for ease of acronym, to really help us make sure, the data can tell us only so much in terms of impacts, but we really need to understand who the vulnerable communities are and what those potential impacts are to fill in some of those details about what specific policies and goals are needed to, or goals and policies, I should say, to increase resilience within the Anacortes community. So that's one of the key roles for the CPAT. In terms of process, we are we're somewhat in this. So this is a kind of a diagram of the overall process. So the blue blue elements, blue is relates to the climate element, and then the others are sort of speaking to the larger comprehensive plan development. We are kind of still within this section. We were just back in this section when we last had the open house, and we have shifted into here a little bit, but there are pieces that we still need to ground truth as part of this. So we've done this a little bit iteratively, just based on schedule needs and needing to move forward. So we're here to kind of share what we've learned from that data gathering and making sure that we have the data, and then kind of show you where we're headed with that, and make sure, again, ground truthing some of that. So that's kind of an overview of where we go. From here, we're going to be through the fall talking about kind of identifying goals and policies to address this as part of the climate element, and then into the early part of next year, folding that into the overall comprehensive plan. The CPAT role, and you guys are likely familiar with this, but I'll just highlight this kind of highlight overview text. The CPAT will help steward the development of the first climate element of the Anacortes Comprehensive Plan and advise city staff and the consultant team throughout the development of the element to ensure the work is informed by stakeholder and community feedback. So for expectations, right now we have outlined 3 meetings, dedicated meetings of this group. This would be the first one, and those meetings would unfold September to January. We offered the city council presentation kind of listening session. We didn't kind of count that as a specific meeting here, but that was also kind of presented as an opportunity for the group to kind of sit in on that. And then work between meetings to review and information and provide feedback. So there may be some email exchange. We'll send you some content between meetings to review or just weigh in on to make sure that we're setting ourselves up for the fall meetings. And then we also see an opportunity for attending related public events, open houses planned for October, and then in the kind of early new year, January, February timeframe. And once we get into kind of Planning Commission meetings and hearings, February, March. City council meetings will follow towards the end of the year during that kind of adoption stage. We can talk about that later. I know that at the council meeting when the resolution was adopted, that there was a desire for potentially more meetings. And I wanted to present the kind of 3 dedicated meetings that we have in our schedule, and then just so there's awareness that there may be other meetings that we ask folks to attend to kind of hear what members of the larger public are talking about. But it is a compressed time frame. We do have a lot of work to do kind of between now and January to get us set up for meeting the goals towards hitting Planning Commission in a time that the information can kind of roll into the comprehensive plan. So are folks comfortable with this kind of general time frame of only 3 dedicated meetings, but opportunities for engagement in between, and attending some meetings during the Planning Commission phase, or are there any concerns around sort of time frame or questions on that?
Carolyn has her hand up.
Oh yeah, go ahead. I can't always see hands, so yeah, please go ahead.
Sorry. Hey, thanks. So I like this as a general outline. I would like to have the opportunity to perhaps do a 4th meeting, a follow-up meeting, because when is the deadline for us to have this? Is it the end of, when's the deadline for the comp plan to be done? Is it December, or is it like middle of the year? 2025.
It's December. This is Libby.
Hi, Libby.
Hi, it's December 2025, but the grant funding that we have for the climate element ends on June 30, 2025.
Okay, so I'm just gonna throw this out there that I would like the opportunity to potentially have one more meeting in like March or something, because I don't know how this is all gonna shake down. So I don't know how other people feel about that, but I would like to make that as a suggestion. I have one other suggestion about our name, CPAT. I just don't like it. It doesn't say anything to me. So I would love it if we could just call ourselves, I mean, not that we take that away entirely, but like if we could call it ourselves like the climate team, that we tell people that we're doing that, we're the climate team. I also think it just like gives a better idea of what we're doing and is a little bit more energizing than saying I'm on the CPAT. Like I'd like to be on the climate team because that's essentially what we are. So I don't know how other people feel about that. Any thoughts?
It's a great idea. It's really hard to, you say CPAT and then you have to explain what it is and what the acronym stands for. And it just sounds like another government bureaucracy.
Yeah, I agree. It's more descriptive. It's simple statement. And people know exactly what you're doing. So I like it.
Yeah, Mike, I see your hand up.
I couldn't figure out how to make my electronic hand go up, so I just raised my hand. I'd like to add on to Carolyn's comment about more meetings. It looks like from the screen that the committee is going to be asked to provide feedback in between the 3 initially proposed meetings. I would like to suggest that we do that as a committee and not as individuals. And therefore, that would suggest that we need to have work sessions to accomplish that.
I think that's a great idea.
And maybe, oh, sorry, Matt, you have your hand up, but I'm jumping in again. Maybe we do those in person if possible. I don't know how I'm a bit, anyway, if that's possible. I know it's hard for people. But most of us we're in Anacortes, so maybe it won't be that hard. And like I'd bring cookies or we could do like pizza or something.
Yeah, you beat me to the punch there. That is exactly what I was going to ask. Where most of us are there, if we can do in-person meetings, I think it's just better to all be in the room, especially if we're doing work sessions. And yeah, more than happy to bring some treats as well to encourage participation.
You had me before pizza.
John Coleman, I see your hand.
I apologize for the, completely virtual meeting. We were in the short time frame, so we thought, because we only are giving people like 2 weeks to get ready or less to get ready for this meeting, that virtually was going to be the only way everybody could make it. But we do intend to have some more in-person options in the future.
Well, I recognize the schedule. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, can I just inquire then? So, are we getting upwards of, 9, 12 meetings between now and March then? Or what's, when you're saying, work groups and stuff, and I'm just, thinking about whether those are evening or during work days, and, trying to think whether hybrid might be an option for folks that aren't immediately local, or in today's day and age where you don't even have time to run to the restroom between your meetings kind of deal.
I think in terms of, I just want to jump in. I definitely want to hear feedback. I'm hearing the need for more meetings. I think we need to come back there. In terms of overall schedule, we need to make sure we are also kind of completing and getting information over to meet kind of larger comprehensive planning timeframe for SEPA and other pieces. So before I can commit to a number of meetings, we really do need to look at the overall schedule to see what we can fit in. And makers can also identify some collaborative sharing tools, like a SharePoint site where we share information to allow for easier for the off-site or off meeting or out of between meeting information, kind of collaborative tools to help support that collaboration. So we are happy to look again at the schedule, take a really close look with John and Libby to fill in what additional meetings. There are some budget considerations there as well that we'll need to look at. But I'm hearing loud and clear the need for more meetings.
Yeah, I totally agree on 3 meetings being being very light for something as big as what we're trying to accomplish. Just for me, the quicker I can get those locked down on my calendar, the less chance I have conflicts.
Okay. John Coleman, do you have your hand up again, or? Oh, and you're muted.
As far as timing goes, the question was asked, when does this need to be done? So we have a target date of February, March, because while the entire comprehensive plan isn't due until the end of 2025, we need a lot of time for the community to be able to review the final draft. So we want to have that ready by summer of next year, so roughly a year from now. The reason we wanted the climate element done February, March, at least with pretty solid drafts at that point, is then we need to take the climate element and review it and incorporate the policies that are in that climate element and make sure that they are comprehensively put into the rest of the comprehensive plan elements. So our transportation element, our land use element, our housing element, et cetera. So that takes time once we have the climate element to synthesize it into the larger comprehensive plan element. So that's why we have that earlier date to be hopefully have a draft of the climate element in spring or late winter.
Yes, Caroline.
Oh,
Caroline.
So I totally appreciate Todd's point too about it's not gonna maybe be 100% easy for everyone to be at every meeting in person. So, and also with makers and the budget concerns of having the paying the consultants to be there, maybe our work sessions in between meetings where maybe we don't have to have consultants there at every one. And we could certainly do those. I think we could do those hybrid from, council chambers or something. We could figure out the technology, but to kind of have that option. And if we did 3 meetings, 3 work sessions, and then maybe a 4th follow-up meeting, and maybe we have consultants at 2. Anyway, we can hammer out all those details later, but I really do like the idea of work sessions in between and being together in person as much as we can, but of course with a hybrid option, so we get the maximum participation.
You're muted, John.
Before we move from the screen, you show here we have an open house in October and January or February. We do have the date for the October open house is October 23rd. That's a Wednesday night at 6 to 8 p.m. And we have not figured out the details of that yet, but as I think there'll be a lot of climate information available there. So that may be someplace that the climate team may want to appear at.
Absolutely. In the interest of moving things along, I definitely hear loud and clear the need to take another look at the schedule. So that is our takeaway number 1 from tonight. We will be doing that immediately and then circling back with you on kind of findings there once we've kind of coordinated with John and Libby on the larger schedule questions. I'm going to switch over to the guiding principles discussion now, and we might need to tighten this up a little bit just to keep on track, because I want to make sure we have a lot of time to talk about kind of the findings of our analysis, because I think that's the heart of what we're doing. But the guiding principles are we're following recommendations. Commerce with this new requirement, it has released kind of detailed guidance that we are following to put together this new element. So one of the pieces that they recommend is establishing guiding principles. There may be peak times in the climate element where there are decisions to be made, one versus the other, and having really succinct, clear guiding principles can be a way of kind of articulating what was most important and what guided those types of decisions, if there are points at which there's differing opinions within this group, or just decision points that need to be made along the way. So that's the role that these guiding principles can take. This is an example. Commerce provided some examples, and we've also looked at a few examples, and we liked this piece for the King County's strategic climate action plan. A lot of the examples I will note are from before the climate element was released, because there was not a requirement then, but these are for sort of climate action planning efforts. But they're really short statements and really succinct, kind of clear statements, not a lot of text to kind of get through, but really provides kind of clear guidance on the types of things. So act with urgency and intention, lead with racial justice and equity, respond to community needs and priorities. You can all read through the rest of them, but just really clear statements that don't take a lot of thinking to navigate what they're trying to do, which is one benefit. It is a medium length list for guiding principles. One of the aspects of the climate element is because it folds into the comprehensive plan, we also have a vision established for the comprehensive plan and goals there. And so we wanted to make sure that the goal here is to create a list that helps support decision-making and clarifies things for the group, but not in such that we're not trying to reinvent the framework or the guiding vision that's in the comprehensive plan already. So that's somewhat where maybe some short or really key sentences that help guide this group would be helpful. And another piece to consider is the existing 2016 comprehensive plan already has a few policies that kind of are acting like these types of guiding policies. So there's one specific goal around climate change adaptation and mitigation in the existing comprehensive plan, as well as some sort of supporting policy language that we have been reviewing and pulled here. So I kind of highlighted in yellow the text within this larger goal that kind of is acting like a kind of initial guiding principle that maybe it might, in this update, might make sense to kind of incorporate, not as a standalone goal in the comprehensive plan, but might be better served as a kind of guiding principle for this group. So at the risk of skipping to, I grayed out the other text just to know that there's more there, but I don't expect you to read all through it, but I am going to skip ahead just to keep us going. So in order to get a kind of running start at this, knowing we have a compressed time frame and we don't want to spend a lot of time, I think, on guiding principles, I took those goals and policies and created some initial guiding principles. The goals and policies were highlighted on the previous slide, and kind of put them into guiding principle language. So what we have here is draft, but I wanted to spend a few moments. We have until about 5:45, so we're going to over a little bit in the first bit, so I think we could add 10 minutes to that, so we could go to 5:50. But we could talk about these pieces and come up with some ideas of what additional guiding principles or ideas we might want to add to this. But I know you can all read, but I'll just read the first three bullets just so we're clear. So be a regional leader by taking local action to mitigate and adapt to climate change. And that's just wordsmithed a bit to be a little shorter based on some of the goals and policies from the previous slide. Seek multi-benefit solutions to climate change adaptation and mitigation that address community needs and priorities. And use best available science and develop strategies to monitor change and progress over time. Information and data will continue to evolve. So those are starting points. We don't have to fully sign off on those. But I wanted to do a little bit of a group brainstorm, and I'm going to pull down my screen here just because PowerPoint is a little frustrating for this. And I'm just going to share a Word document and take notes as we have some kind of a discussion there. So that, yeah, perfect. So now I just need to get into this screen. So some of the other, and I'm hoping that scroll down on your screen. I can zoom out a little bit. I just want to see if I can see the whole thing. There we go. Some additional principles that we might want to add to this: equity and environmental justice, partnerships and coordination with local governments and tribes. So all communities throughout Washington are doing this, and some initiatives are going to be for the city of Anacortes, but I think there's a need for a lot of regional partnerships and coordination. Transparency and accountability, we hear that a lot from the community. I want to, maybe that should be noted here. Action oriented, some goals and principles really highlight the urgency of this issue and the need to take action in the near term, even if some of the long-term questions are still on the horizon. And track record, this was pulled from one of the other, I think this was actually maybe Thurston County, but learn and build from the success of others. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. In fact, we're absolutely trying not to. We really wanted to pull in. So with that, I'm going to stop talking. I see, Warren, you have your hand up. So yeah, what are your thoughts?
Just looking at the starter list of the guiding principles, it just seems to me that these are all worded in a way that puts us in a reactive mode rather than proactive. I mean, for example, the first one, be a regular leader by taking local action, I would insert to anticipate, mitigate, and adapt to climate change. And I think, a lot of the things that we have here should be along those lines so that we're not just reacting to things and trying to plan ahead on. We should be planning ahead on what might be happening or we think will be happening.
Gonna put it in track changes so it's clear what your comments were here. So sorry, your anticipate. Mitigate.
Yeah, that's all it needs to be inserted there. Yeah,
okay.
On that one.
You have your hand up.
Yeah, I was going to say the track record one could easily be built into building 3 or a bullet 3, best available sciences and success of others, to develop our strategies, without having to necessarily create a new bullet. And I think it's critical to, either those additional principles consider 1 and 2, maybe some kind of combination, but it's critical that we hear from all sectors of the community to make sure that we're understanding the concerns and needs of, those that are overburdened or tribal or, whatever community, fishing, there's whatever sort of way you want to, we need to find a way to make sure that all the stakeholders have a say at the table. Not quite sure how to wordsmith that, but
yeah, and we're not doing the fine tune wordsmithing tonight. What we're wanting to do is just get ideas and bullet lists, and then this is a homework item. We'll kind of take this, put it more into kind of proposed language, and then this is the kind of thing we would send back to you guys to think about a little more. So, but yeah, I see hands up. Sandy, you're just the next box on my screen. Do you want to jump in?
Oh, sure. I would just echo what Todd was saying. Those are the same thoughts that were coming to my head too, especially related to environmental justice and that being, making sure that everybody's involved and understanding who has been significantly impacted by issues related to climate change and who will be impacted in the future, and just keeping an eye on that.
Kevin, you're the next box on my screen with a hand up.
Yeah, actually, Sandy just hit her last point was who will be impacted in the future. And I think it's important that, we're all of a certain demographic and age in here. I was happy to see that there's a high school representative or a school. And I think that's a very, very important perspective to keep in these conversations.
I'm really just taking notes verbatim as we go, just to kind of guide. So, so just know that we'll be massaging that language, but this is great and just what we wanted. Matt, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I think we need to consider the, how do I put this broadly? The economic impacts, impacts of anything we recommend or put into the plan is going to have impacts on socioeconomic groups across the sphere from low economics to high economics, the impacts to local businesses, as well as impacts to city finances. I guess economic impacts.
Yeah.
Across the board.
Michael Mills.
I think Matt said it better than I was going to say it. I wanted to build in somewhere that our recommendations need to be practical and logical, and his words said that better.
Huh?
yeah, ponying off that, I think practical, logical, but also aggressive. So there's gonna have to be some sort of balance in the decision making, right? And that maybe loops into that lower one about being action oriented.
Marlene, you're the next kind of person on my screen with a hand up.
Yeah, I was thinking along the same lines as the last two, Michael and Todd, that it needs to be action oriented, doable, goes along with practical, not just a bunch of platitudes and aspirations, but actually things we can get done.
Carolyn, I think you're the next one with a hand up.
Okay, great. So on my other screen, I have the comp plan pulled up and the environmental element. And I'm just getting some ideas off here. One of the things we talk about a lot and we haven't really done a lot about is our trees and our tree canopy. But really what that goes, that's part of a larger point, which is recognize the importance of the natural resources that we do have and how we can best protect those. Whether it's trees, water quality, wildlife corridors, things like that. And I don't want to get, I feel like I'm getting a little bit more too granular here, but the basic tenet of recognizing what we have. And so I don't know how we quantify that. But recognizing what we have and working to protect and enhance that. And again, it needs to be more practical than how I'm saying it. Like, how do we do that? Which some of that is laid out in the comp plan.
That's great. And it actually is, I think we have a minimum requirement slide as we get into when I start to present the resilience. And that is actually kind of a minimum requirement for the recognizing and protecting. So that's kind of assumed as part of the work of the resilience element, but it's good to know that that's, a really key priority as well for this group. So yeah, we can, makes a lot of sense to highlight that here. Crystal, you have your hand up too.
Just ensuring that we're looking at sustainable long-term solutions.
Can you say what you mean exactly by sustainable in that context? Because that word can mean different things. I want to make sure I'm understanding you correctly.
Sustainable in terms of something that's good for the environment. Like, for example, I'll talk from a public transportation perspective. We're looking at green, zero emissions buses, the ferry.
I think I was just trying to get at making sure I was understanding sort of sustainable from the kind of that angle, but some, economic sustainability is a part of sustainability as well. So I just wanted to make sure I was understanding that definition there. So we're right about at time. Are there any other hands up that I'm not seeing or haven't called on? Are folks okay if we kind of save that at that stage, and then we'll send this back to you with some thoughts, and then I think my thinking was we would kind of tighten up this language, send some ideas back to you. In the interim, you guys can kind of, maybe that's a work session item, and then this would be something we would kind of sign off at the next meeting. Just say like, yeah, these are the statements that we want to use to guide this process from here. Does that seem like a good way to move forward for this? Great. Any thoughts on, we do have kind of long sentence statement. As I were refining, does it make sense for us to kind of like pull out a couple action statements in front to make it a little more clear and then follow with a longer narrative? Is that helpful? I'm seeing a couple head shake. Okay, yeah, we might try that. I do find that really helpful because sometimes you have long words. The goal here is not to bog people down with more words. It's really to kind of really clarify and help with decision making, not further complicate. So we will in the reversion that goes out to you, you'll hopefully see a little bit of clarification. We welcome edits on that. So let me just stop my share again while I go back to the presentation. Bear with me for a moment. Let me save that. Okay. So now we're going to dig into the resilience sub-element. And as mentioned, so this was the slide I was just speaking of. So there are some minimum requirements for the resilience. And I tried really hard to cut down the text on the slide, but there are a few that I just wanted to have the full text there available. The underlined portion kind of gets at the key part, but, address natural hazards created or aggravated by climate change. And then it lists a lot of the kind of key natural hazards to address. So a lot of what we're presenting today, we've looked at a lot of them. We're presenting kind of where we see some of the kind of key priority areas, but want to really talk broadly with you today about all the full picture as well. Requirement 2, identify, protect, and enhance natural areas to foster climate resilience, and as well as areas of vital habitat for safe species migration. So Carolyn, I think that's part of where that kind of minimum requirement is. We really need to look at what, how the natural resources that we have, how to protect them, or that Anacortes has, not we, Anacortes has, and how those can be protected to help foster long-term resilience. And then the third requirement is really identifying and protecting the community resilience to those climate elements. So we're talking about human health, human systems, those kind of things to support adaptation. So that just helps kind of provide that. And we're happy to send these. I think you have these with you in the presentation that was sent out, so you can reference back to those. So a starting point for that, how we started looking at that, we identified as part of the Commerce Guidance some key assets. So these are kind of high level identification of the assets that are part of the Anacortes community, and they are very high level. I want to stress that the goal here is to kind of identify within the different sectors that are impacted by climate change, what are some really high level things, so that when we start to compare those to the climate element, they can start to paint a picture of where the impacts were. So we developed an initial list and then refined that list with staff to kind of fill in some gaps. And then we went ahead and paired those assets with the hazards that that Anacortes will face due to climate change. And then started to kind of think about what those priority hazards would be. And so the feedback from today will really help us kind of sign off on that analysis, make sure we're headed in the right direction, that we didn't miss anything, and probably fill in some gaps, because I'm going to say we probably did miss a few things and want to fill those in today. What I'm going to do is kind of go through this list and kind of stop at each slide. These are organized by sector, and that sector organization comes directly from Commerce's guidance on the comprehensive plan to kind of help that organization. So agriculture and food systems, some of the key assets that we saw in Anacortes are local foods and markets, local food distribution. So if there's any kind of key areas where food's distributed, or a key food bank, those kind of things that would fall kind of within that category. Seafood processing facilities is something that was added by staff as a really key aspect of the local economy, but also tied with agriculture and food systems and impacts those are facing. Buildings and energy. So these are really large, high-level categories of thinking about commercial buildings. How are commercial buildings impacted by climate change? So when we're talking about how might they be impacted by flooding, that's what this list of assets helps us do. So it is high level, but it does help sort of paint that picture. So we split it out, commercial buildings and residential buildings. And then we've talked about energy infrastructure kind of writ large, substations, transition lines, pipelines. We know those aren't locally controlled by Anacortes, but they are critical to business and operations within Anacortes. And so understanding how those could be impacted in the future to identify future coordination needs and just planning needs writ large is a key aspect of this planning effort. Cultural resources and practices, we wanted to kind of understand what the potential for impacts were there. So historic built environment resources, buildings and individual buildings and sites, archaeological resources and ethnographically named places, cemeteries, all fall into those categories. So I'm going to stop at the end of each slide, recognizing this is, I'm not going to pull down the screen, but if maybe we can pause for a few minutes and just say, does this list feel like we're capturing the right pieces? And there's like 3 more or 4 more slides coming, so it's not the only pieces. But yes, Marlene, I see your hand.
I was just wondering, under buildings and energy, as far as infrastructure, that stormwater drainage and sewer systems aren't there, and that's going to be those are assets that are really important with for climate resilience.
Absolutely. Whereas the whole utilities kind of infrastructure section coming on a few slides. Okay. So it is included, but just in a different sector. But yes, thanks. Absolutely critical, and glad that was brought up. Sandy, yeah.
Yeah, and this is something that could come up in a later slide, but when it comes to buildings and energy, one of the things I did want to highlight is that there is both federal and state and local energy and utility assistance that is provided to low-income and marginalized people around the county, and it's many millions of dollars. And so I think that's pretty important to put in there as an asset, that we've got an infrastructure that allows us to be able to support people to pay those bills, and even to, for example, get air conditioners during these times where heat is rising. So I don't know if that fits into that category, but it's millions of dollars in a system that works to get money out to people who need it.
That is a great point. I'm not totally sure if that fits in that category, but it is critical that we include it somewhere. So thank you for raising that, and we will figure out how to fit it in. Todd.
Yeah, I just don't want to jump ahead to another slide, but the folks that Marcus and I work for, when you talk about cultural resources, that's intimately tied to natural resources, first foods, cultural use materials, which is intimately included in, mental well-being. And so, in our vulnerability assessment, we kind of don't think about these in the same kind of categories as much as an intertwine. And so I just want to make sure that there is going to be an opportunity to talk about exacerbated human health and mental health things because of changes in the environment and lack of access to different things and how that's in there. So
Absolutely. I know this is kind of a hard place to start because it's like high level and not there. We really just want to make sure we haven't missed a key consideration in this list. There is lots of opportunity as we kind of do that asset and hazard pairing to kind of write down the key consequences that we're seeing from that. And we can share once we kind of pull in the information from this meeting, kind of share what we're doing with this information in greater detail if there's interest in seeing that. So yes, it is coming, but a good reminder that the interconnectedness of this is really key, and we don't want to lose that. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't notice, and I don't see roads as being on this list. I was wondering if that, because that is so integral to getting food where it needs to go, or to helping move people who are susceptible to the impacts of climate change, if that might be something to incorporate as sort of this high level view.
Absolutely. I'm just going to skip ahead. I'm going to give you a preview just so that you can see what is concluded. So, and then I'll come back so we can look at these lists. So that was just the first slide. The other sectors are economic development, ecosystems, emergency management, health and well-being, transportation, water resources, waste management, and then zoning and development. So it's a pretty broad cross-section of just all the different sectors that can be impacted by climate change. So I think having seen that, I know you didn't get a chance to probably read through all the individual pieces, but maybe that gives you a sense of like, okay, all the sectors are there, but what we really do want to make sure is we haven't missed a key kind of bullet here that is critical to understanding Anacortes. We can go back if we need to, but I'd like to keep moving so we kind of keep moving through. Happy to go back if we need to. The next sector is economic development. So again, needing to stay high level so it doesn't become overburdensome when we're starting to kind of compare all the potential impacts. We focus on kind of the key employment sectors, so kind of grouped together. So how does it impact, potential businesses? And then as you start to pair them and explore those impacts, you can get to more levels of detail. Retail and local businesses, so understanding local business operations specifically. And communications is kind of a little bit of a funny fit here, but it is so integral to kind of a long-term economic development that the impacts to kind of fiber optic and the communications in infrastructure, we did put under economic development here as a physical asset that is really key. So, and only for purposes of alphabet, we moved from there to ecosystems, and then following just the structure Congress had laid out here. So the key pieces, again, high level categories, but really wanting to be kind of broad and comprehensive, marine shorelines and reserve areas, streams, wetlands, and freshwater shorelines. We pulled apart the Anacortes community forest lands because it's very significant, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the significance of it from our analysis later today. And then we also included the Anacortes Park system separately, just to kind of understand those two as kind of unique assets and have some slightly different potential impacts or potential consideration. Yes, Todd.
we should probably add lakes to that, streams, wetlands, and freshwater shorelines. Never mind, sorry.
Well, that's maybe good, yeah, just to be explicit, yeah. The intention was to include it there, but maybe the list, we should be more explicit there.
Nope, that's me reading too fast and skipping something, sorry.
All right, well, just in the interest of time, moving on to emergency management. So understanding how emergency management might be impacted by climate change. So thinking about this in terms of places like fire stations was a key one, police stations, but also in terms of emergency response, vehicles, 911 operators, crew. What are the potential impacts to crew from some of the projected impacts of climate change? And then emergency shelters was another piece that that staff added in. And some of these pieces can be added, as we're going to show some preliminary maps. If they're very critical and emerging as a real priority, we can kind of be physically mapping them in our tool. And we've done a little bit of that already, although I'm not quite sharing that level of detail tonight, but we can get to that level of understanding kind of that in terms of climate vulnerability. Yeah, Mike Mills. Oh, you're still muted.
I was just going to add in parenthetically under emergency response, the vehicles, 911, et cetera. I have not confirmed this, but I understand there is a CERT organization here in Anacortes, Community Emergency Response Trained people, that if we can verify that, that should be added as an asset.
Okay. Can anyone on the call verify that, just to close that loop?
Yeah, there is a CERT group in Skagit County, and there is a pretty good presence here on the island.
Perfect. All right, health and well-being. We included here hospital, Island Health is a really key central asset. So really understanding what are the potential impacts to that system. I will say kind of thinking about it as a system is fine too, more than just a place, obviously a business as well. So recognize that, but in terms of health and well-being, and then outpatient, medical and mental health clinics and resources. But this is when you weren't sure, maybe you weren't fully capturing the breadth necessary here to really kind of be able to understand what kind of resources for health and well-being might be needed. Is anything jumping out as missing, particularly for vulnerable populations? Yeah, Todd.
This is an area that's actually pretty heavily written about in our vulnerability assessment, and it wraps around the stress and sort of PTSD of sort of cultural loss. And I don't know if that's specific only to Indigenous communities, but you know, when you talk to an Indigenous person about the loss of salmon, and I think there's numerous folks that have said, you know, if the salmon disappears, so do our people. You know, it's part of their cultural identity. Or the fact that I know people that trace their heritage to common relations with members of JPOD, and the fear and stress around loss of those family members can result in some pretty severe mental health disorders and need of assistance. I'm not quite sure how you wrap into this, but you know, I just found it interesting that health and well-being has 2 sub bullets, and it was a part that had a very large section devoted to it in our work. So I think maybe it's all in the sub bullets that sort of this fleshes out, but it just appears to me that health and well-being might be a little bit underserved in this sort of mapping here.
That's great. Very helpful. Carolyn. Oh, you're muted still.
Todd brings up a really good point that I hadn't thought of, and also I'm thinking about, so community relationships and sense of connection to each other, our community, the natural world. And also I think as a whole, maybe a lot of us are feeling a sense of loss right now in various ways. Certainty, stability, security, and all the, you know, the list goes on. So I think that's a very real thing that is affecting a very large proportion of people. So if we can get that in there some way, kind of I don't know what else to add to that, but I think you know what I mean.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think we hit sort of the health side, but maybe not the well-being side, and maybe not all of the health based on what Todd is not fully comprehensive health. We are noted mental health there to be inclusive of that it is not just physical health, but mental health too. But totally agree that there's some more work to be done here to kind of make sure we're being comprehensive.
Right.
And I'm oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry, I'll just finish by saying that, you know, the kind of mental health that maybe doesn't result in actual like care, outpatient or clinics or anything, but that is still a very important part of well-being, and how that can be addressed or noted.
Just so we're clear on kind of what we, oh, sorry, Ted, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and I think, sort of ways to think about it, beyond just, the community that I work for directly, a fisherman, feeling loss of his livelihood and how do I support my family, that kind of stress, or, folks that recreate in the forest lands that are deeply worried that that release for them or that critical activity for their well-being may be impaired. I think there's lots of ways to sort of spread that out to different members of the community. And then I think, sort of a link between this and maybe the emergency response is, there's been lots of studies that show in, periods of really long heat wave, crime goes up, violence goes up, people are just short-tempered and angry. And so I think there's a link between, what we're going to be facing, with increased temperature and smoke days where you can't get out or what have you, and not just mental health and well-being, but potentially stressing on, our emergency responders as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, that is what by including crew there, that is one of the conclusions that we're coming to, is just not only just having to operate emergency response in those times, but just what is the extended period, the additional labor potentially there. These are all wonderful, wonderful points. I do want to move on to transportation just to keep us moving, but these are all really much appreciated additions to this list. For transportation, one of these jumped out to me kind of right off the bat, and looking and exploring Anacortes in a little more detail, was just the kind of that you are an island or a city that's on an island and have kind of limited access points on and off island. So the bridges become really key connection points. And so we have really spent a little time looking at those bridges to make sure we understand those as like those critical connections. We included kind of the breadth of transportation facilities here. So, and it is quite a range. And of course, it's wonderfully unique in this, is having all of the broad range across here. So marine terminals, ferry service, airport, transit, active transportation, bike and ped. So all of that kind of falls within that broad category of transportation. Anything that we would add there? And this is where roads, there was a comment about roads. So roads and bridges, you kind of lump those together in terms of potential for infrastructure impacts. That's where that's coming in. Yeah, Kevin, I see your hand up.
Don't forget the marinas for the marine terminals.
Okay.
There's a whole bunch of marinas around here.
Yes. Perfect. I think marine terminals, we might have been thinking about those a little bit under businesses, but it's important to understand them. So definitely weren't ignored, but yeah, maybe in a slightly different category of a business rather than transportation. But yeah, definitely a key asset in the area. We might want to call them out more explicitly there during that. Mike Mills, yeah.
Did we touch on churches or schools anywhere? Is that so?
Oh, yeah. We that is a bit of a mess, isn't it? I don't think we have churches or schools. I thought they had added schools in, but nope, they would have popped up. So yeah, schools. I'd probably put schools under health and well-being, and maybe churches too, just because there isn't really a kind of community. But we'll think a little bit about that in terms of how we're this playing out, and maybe there's some guidance from Commerce on that. But great add. That is a miss there. Some of those might fall into the kind of park system part, but we were thinking about parks under ecosystem. So definitely want to make sure we're capturing both of those concepts. And a school is not part of the park system. Okay, so just in the interest of keeping us moving, so the last, and this is the last slide. So water resources, looking at both the water sources, Skagit River, groundwater. The city has been able to secure water rights to Whistle Lake recently as part of some larger kind of water source planning, I believe. So that's why that's included there. Water infrastructure, wastewater, and stormwater. So all those are all the pieces that are there. We're coordinating with staff and getting input. We know there has been a lot of good work that's going on that predates the climate element. So some of this is just kind of responding and making sure that's getting pulled in. But Anacortes, the city has been really proactive on some of these fronts there. And some of this work is currently underway as part of the element update. So not as much direct work might be included in the climate element for this, but we certainly want to track and note and highlight and make sure we're coordinating with staff on those updates. And they will be included in the vulnerability assessment and study, but just we know that there's good work going on and we don't want to overlap there. We want to use our resources where there might be gaps and identify those. Waste management, a lot of this is sort of not as directly replicable, but we did note sort of solid waste and recycling systems, and then RV dump stations was one piece that was added in, as those are often located in key locations or sometimes in long shorelines, I believe, is the thing there. Yeah, Carolyn. Oh, you're muted.
Did it again. I think we could add composting to solid waste and recycling.
Great. And then the last category here, oh yeah, sorry, Todd, go ahead.
I'm not seeing anything on sort of, maybe it's all wrapped in across all of this, but like economic costs, because energy costs are going to go up if you have to cool more. I'm not sure if that, it's going to become more expensive to maintain waterfront areas with sea level rise and increased storms.
Yeah,
I'm not sure if that's its own category, if it's something that's sort of wrapped throughout.
That is sort of the nuance that comes out once you pair the impacts or the hazards with these assets. So that is kind of the exercise that we've gone through, and what we're going to be presenting today is kind of our findings to date. But the pieces that have been added, we haven't fully kind of assessed or considered. So we're going to be expanding that, what you see tonight. So that's part of why I said up front, what we're seeing tonight is draft and still evolving. But yes, that level of nuance is part of it. But this is really just understanding what you have and what's important, and then how it's potentially impacted. And then from there, we understand like, oh yeah, the changes in energy needs or various pieces, that becomes more clear from that kind of pairing. Yeah, Carolyn. And muted.
Sorry, I guess I'm not usually muted at all, but so I thought of a couple of ads like way back in agriculture and food systems. I just thought of community gardens, because you have some of those, and then health and well-being. To Mike's point about churches and schools, I think we could add support networks, and maybe the senior center that is part of the Parks Department, but I think it has a lot to do with health and well-being for Meals on Wheels and a place for people to go. Also, it's going to be a cooling center and things like that. So those are just some ads I just thought of.
Perfect. All right, so the last category here is zoning and development, and this is pretty high level, and as we're kind of doing our asset, we can figure out if we need to kind of further complicate this, but what we didn't want to hone in on every zone here. The goal here is to kind of be helpful and kind of point you to where the vulnerabilities are, and the more specific impacts versus becoming so detailed that it's not helpful. So waterfront focused zones, we kind of took a high level look at the zoning. So there's a lot of very waterfront specific zones. They're doing slightly different things depending on what that zone is, but a very waterfront oriented community is what we see in Anacortes. Not true everywhere, but certainly it's a wonderful asset and again, really critical to the identity of Anacortes. The central business district, sort of separate from that, and the commercial ave corridor as kind of a unique kind of commercial center within the city. And then we just sort of grouped residential areas more broadly under that zoning. I know that's a very simplified effort, but just an effort of kind of understanding kind of key assets from that perspective there. Does that framing make sense, or is anything might be missed that you haven't seen pop up in other categories? I will say this from the framework that Commerce laid out, this understanding this, how it impacts zoning is still a little bit of a exercise that we're kind of really trying to tease out. Some of the other pairings are a lot more clear. But I think honing in on this idea of like, there's just a lot of really critical waterfront focus and identity in Anacortes is really key. So understanding that as from that perspective, that was the tack we took here. Okay, well, I'm going to move on just because there is more to do and we don't have endless time. So want to now switch over to resilient sub-elements, and we're going to talk about kind of like local climate impacts and some of the priority hazards that have emerged to date, but this isn't necessarily the final list of what we're seeing. And I'm now going to introduce John Phillips more directly, who's going to take over, and then I'll pop back in. So we're going to kind of share this spot. So John, do you want to take over?
Sure, thanks, Katie. Hi, everyone. John Phillips with Parametrics. We're supporting makers on the climate element, doing a lot of the data gathering and technical work on climate change. I've been working in the climate scene for a number of years, both in the public and private sector. And we've been doing a lot of these climate vulnerability assessments all over the Western United States. Mainly, we just finished a big one for Snohomish County. Did one for the state of Nevada. So we're going to go over a little bit about the methodology and data. We're going to be presenting a lot of data today. So I just want to talk to you a little bit about climate data and what it means and what the limitations are. So these are projections. A lot of the projections you're going to see, these are estimates of what may happen in the future, are from the University of Washington Climate Impacts Group. We're so lucky to have them here. And have this information, and we do talk to them on a regular basis to understand where we are, but we also pull in information where we can find data gaps, or we need additional data to kind of address some questions that we may come up with as staff, or that you may come up with, where we'll pull information from other places as well. But the main source of this information is the Climate Impacts Group, most notably what's called the CMR, the Climate Mapping for Resilient Washington, another great tool that we have here in the state of Washington. And I will say that other states don't. So we should feel lucky. We also want to give a nod to the local Skagit Climate Science Consortium. We pulled a lot of their information. We've read some of their infographics on what may happen with the Skagit River, and within Skagit County. A lot of our social and economic information will come from both the American Community Services, which is part of the census, and the Center for Disease Control. And you'll see we'll be pulling all those together to show you how that kind of works on this climate vulnerability. But on our next slide, we just want to sort of go over some of these projections. And when we talk about projections, we're talking about large, what are called global circulation models, or GCMs, that are used internationally to estimate what will happen to the climate in the future. And these climate models are run all the way out for over 100 years. And they give us projections. The further away from today we go, the more uncertainty there is in the actual impact that may be happening. And we'll kind of highlight some of those ranges of uncertainty as we present the information that we're going to be sharing with you. To run a lot of this information, there's both highs and lows. And there's usually a median, something in the middle that we can kind of focus on. But we also have to acknowledge that there's a range of impacts that are going to happen, but also there's uncertainty in the data. So we can pick a lot of different numbers between 0 and 100, just for a reference, and focus on what that impact may be. A lot of times when we're doing planning efforts, we'll focus on the median. If we're doing a large infrastructure project or focused on something critical to that, we might actually look at kind of a lower probability, higher risk scenario, like sea level rise is a place where we can see this. We'll talk a little bit about the heat, extreme heat, and we'll also be talking about precipitation as part of that. So Katie, can you jump me to the next slide, please? So some of the climate projections we're looking at, and these are coming from that University of Washington climate mapping tool. We looked at drought. So this is your late summer precipitation, changes in stream flow, total annual precipitation. What we want to focus on is we're probably going to see over the next 100 years, the annual precipitation staying pretty much within the historic what we've seen. But what's going to happen is a lot of that rain may come at one time, and we'll see that on the next slide. But also a decrease in the summer precipitation, which is going to change the hydrology of a lot of the rivers and streams in the area. So we've got to be cognizant of that. And that's one of the things we can tie back to some of those assets. Temperature, it was brought up, heat, it's going to get warmer. There's a few things we're using to kind of reference. One is just the changes in average summary maximum temperature, just summary, not summer. We just wanted to be kind of positive on that. But the 90-degree max humidex is a measure of the total heat. So that's the actual air temperature and humidity, and the number of days that that'll be increasing to kind of give you a sense of where things are going, the increase over those days. And we have the historic days that we actually just got from the University of Washington. They didn't quite publish them for us, but the number of days this will increase. So we'll probably be going from 2 to 3 days of temperatures in the 90 to over 34 days by the end of the century. So something to, I guess, say look forward to, but also something we can prepare for. And we also used a 65-degree minimum day. So that's the overnight temperature. And as some of you have talked about mental health and physical health, overnight temperatures have a huge impact on physical health for the people that have health issues, but also mental health of not being able to sleep at night because it's too warm. If you don't have some sort of cooling or air conditioning, we want to kind of look at both the max day and the min day, what happens with temperature. And that helps a little bit with us understanding. Katie will get into a lot of details about wildfire. The historic for wildfire is about 48 days of having a high fire day danger. We'll see those increase over time. Both by 2050, looking at almost a month, 2 months of high fire danger to going over to 3 to 4 months of fire. So you can pretty much assume that the summer from July through September to October would be times when we have high fire days, and then go back to that late summer precipitation actually decreasing over time. And you can see in the parentheses kind of the range of those decreases, a range of those increases. Because like I said, the climate models can do a pretty good job of giving us a median, but that we do have to acknowledge that there's also data points on the outside edge. Next slide, please. And then we can go to the precipitation. So the two storms we kind of are using to kind of get a sense of where extreme precipitation, that's your 20-year storm. So that's a pretty heavy duty storm. And then the heavier precipitation magnitude of 2-year. Now, we're using the term precipitation and not rain, because right now we're not getting like how much more snow will fall versus how much more rain. So we don't know whether this precipitation falls as rain or snow. Yes, in the future, it will still snow. And that could be a pretty intense snowstorm happening with the following month or following week being a pretty heavy rain day, which actually causes additional urban flooding issues because you're putting basically a rain on snow event, which those of us that have experienced those understand that actually causes a lot of issues with the flooding. And then the number of days where we get 1 inch of precipitation in a 24-hour period, that's a good measure here in the Northwest. We're not Florida, we're not Texas. We get 1 inch in a 24-hour period. That's a pretty significant storm to be alerted to, especially if you're doing stormwater planning, as someone has brought up. And then we've kind of targeted on sea level rise, looking at just the relative sea level rise. And we'll talk a little bit about sea level rise in a little bit. I have another slide on it, but just relative sea level rise is just that increase over the mean high water is what we're going to be looking at. So we're not actually saying there's going to be 1 feet more if you go down to the tide gauge. It's actually 1 foot over where the mean high water is now, or even where the mean low water is. And you just have to be able to assess where that water happens. University of Washington Coastal Resiliency Network have done a really good job of doing sea level rise projections on top of vertical land movement. So since we're here in the Pacific Northwest, we know Earth is moving underneath us at a pretty slow rate. So these relative sea level rise account for vertical land movement. And they actually have a little bit of an assessment that if we were to experience a major subduction zone earthquake, that these would change. So these might be a little bit different over time. If you ever want to see what happens when you have a good subduction zone earthquake, look at the San Francisco tide gauge in the early 1900s, and you can see the Great San Francisco quake on their tide gauge. Next slide, please. So just a nod that, like we said, we have the Skagit County Climate Science Consortium working with the University of Washington to update the water system plan. We also know that there's a stormwater comprehensive plan being updated, and other plans that are actually going on within the community that are looking at this. But this one's a key one, looking at the water system. The water system was looked at when your treatment plant was upgraded, I think back in like 2006. The flows in the Skagit River, amount of sediment in the Skagit River was kind of considered as that plant was upgraded. So we kind of feel like we can let that group do its work, acknowledge that work is going on, keep tabs on what the outcomes of that work might be that might have, have an impact on what we might do as goals and policies within the comprehensive plan. But great job to the city for being there and forward thinking. I think I remember case studies on the city of Anacortes way back many years ago. I want to say how many years ago, so you guys could all guess how old I am. Next slide, please. So let's talk about heat. We put heat kind of at the forefront. It's one place where we've been talking about sea level rise for about 20 years in the Pacific Northwest. We're just now starting to talk about heat as a climate impact, and also looking at adaptation features. You see a lot more emphasis on it. Washington State Department of Health has done a lot more work to understand where heat-related illnesses are happening, how often that would happen. And when we see that increase in 90 degrees, and this is pretty universal, we thought it was just a Pacific Northwest thing, but actually there's been studies around the world that say, when you reach a temperature of 90 degrees, the human body just doesn't react as well. So we can use 90 degrees as a kind of a starting point for having this discussion. The map on the right kind of gives that vulnerability, and we assess vulnerability both on the impact from climate change, in other words, the 90-degree temperature, but also on a number of social economic factors such as people's age, people's health conditions, their ability, their housing types, their ability for housing. I think Sandy mentioned it earlier that, hey, there's all these federal programs out there to help with housing. We've been doing some studies with other states and potentially within this area to look at different housing types and what the impact of the extreme heat would be. One of the things are kind of temporary housing like RVs, or housing like mobile homes and things that are less insulated. There's kind of a low, more sensitive with least adaptive capacity for heat, whereas a well-insulated home on the waterfront might not have as much. So you can see kind of that vulnerability. The darker the color, the more vulnerable that population in that area is to heat. You can also see it's kind of residing kind of in the more urbanized area of Anacortes where you have less tree cover and canopy. Next slide.
Now I'm gonna
80.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump in on wildfire, but that was a lot of information and I recognize it. So I'm gonna just take a pause here and just make sure we offer you guys a chance to kind of ask questions on what we've seen today. So we have a few more slides to talk about other impacts, but I just I know it's a lot of information. Does anyone have questions or key things they want to raise now, or do you want us to keep going and then we can kind of have discussion? I'm not seeing hands up immediately, so I'm going to keep going, but happy to, please, we welcome comments, and you can stop us if you see questions on the slide, and we built in some discussion as well. So from a wildfire standpoint, obviously we know that there are regional impacts from wildfire. We've already been experiencing this regionally, and we spoke in the previous slide around that increase in high fire danger days. But wildfire is an area, especially in Western Washington, where there's kind of growing information, and there's a lot of information out there and not a huge public understanding. So we did spend a little extra time looking at this. I am presenting this. When we met with Steph, we weren't able to meet with the fire chief during that meeting. So this is an area where we might need to ground truth a little bit, and I just want to recognize that up front and welcome that input. So again, the earlier slide shows that increase in fire danger days and those kind of regional impacts, but we are also seeing some local impacts from potential for local impacts from wildfire risk. So the historic regime in Western Washington is less frequent fires in Western Washington, but when they occur, they can be intense when they happen. So I think there's not a broad public understanding of just the existing wildfire risk in Western Washington that is there. The maps that you're seeing on this slide are DNR's maps that show wildland-urban interface areas. And if I could get I don't see all the slides, but or WUI for short. Are folks familiar with what wildland-urban interface areas are? A few are. but not everyone. Okay, I want to go through this really carefully because it's a really key, and there's a lot of not a really clear understanding. So I am going to take a little extra time here, just so we're extra sure on what things. So the Department of Natural Resources developed these statewide maps to identify these wildland urban interface areas. And these are areas where wildland, so it could be often forest, but it could also be grassland, or in some areas shrub steppe. So different kind of wildland ecosystems interact or meet with human development. So structures is an easy way to think about that. So critically, WUI maps are not themselves wildfire risk maps. So that is a really important distinction. What we are not showing you right now is a map of Anacortes with the wildfire risk on it. But WUI areas, I'm calling them WUI, it's an easy or somewhat easy acronym for wildland urban interface. Difficult to say, but that's what WUI refers to. They do provide a helpful tool to define wildfire risk. So that is a really critical distinction that I want to make sure everyone is clear on, that this map is not intended to show where wildfire risk is in Anacortes currently, but to note that this is a tool for understanding where wildfire risk may be. There was a 2019 Skagit Community Wildfire Protection Plan that was done at the county level, and that also identified some high-risk areas in Anacortes, particularly around the Anacortes Community Forest lands. We know that there was a fire in the Anacortes Community Forest lands in 2016, and this planning effort, I think, was on the heels of that. So some people that were worried or concerned around those fires were attended meetings as part of that planning effort. DNR is in the process of updating these WUI maps to provide more specific wildfire risk maps, with the goal kind of at a state level of potentially enacting some requirements to help mitigate those. So it's important. I think this is an opportunity to understand that there is some existing risk in wildfire, and also kind of set the city up for the future coordination when there are more specific maps. If there are the need for regulations to change and require mitigation, such as different types of home hardening strategies or vegetation management, so zoned kind of defensible space, changing where vegetation is around people's homes, that can be coordinated and understood with the existing critical areas. At the June open house, we had a few attendees come who are property owners adjacent to the Anacortes Community Forest with concerns around their property maybe having some risk that's identified and not being able to do anything about it because they're right adjacent to the community forest public land. I want to stop there knowing that there's folks with local depth and knowledge on this topic to see if there's anything that I missed or wanted to clarify from what I just presented. I know it's a lot of information. Okay. So again, a lot of emerging information here. I think it's a good opportunity in the climate element to just spend a little time on wildfire risk. Not that it's necessarily one of the biggest risks in the area, but that there is not a great public understanding of what those risks may be. So switching to landslide, I wanted to just note that this is another currently identified in the hazard mitigation. Oh yeah, Todd, I see your hand up. Do you have a question on the wildfire?
Yeah, sorry, I just shot it up there because the other thing I think that people maybe aren't fully understanding is when we're thinking wildfire risk, the most recent example in Hawaii sort of jumps to mind, but the regional smoke days and impacts on air quality and the health impacts on people for that is probably something that's going to be a much more regular occurrence in Anacortes. So while we may not have, as much direct fire damage, we still have a huge impact from regional smoke and air quality issues on human health.
Absolutely. Yeah, I kind of skipped over that quickly because I wanted to kind of cover that, but absolutely part of our thinking and our analysis. But thank you for highlighting that. Todd, I did include a kind of at the end, you may have saw in the draft, we have been looking at the Samish vulnerability assessment and would love to hear a little bit more when we talk through that in the presentation, but definitely picked up on those impacts and want to kind of give time for that discussion today too. For landslide, the hazard mitigation plan does identify some current risks in the city, and there are current critical area regulations for development standards to kind of mitigate some of that risk. map here is from our climate map, but just the city's existing data. I know the legend is hard to read. The brown areas are what identified in your in the city's data as stable slopes, but the pieces to look at here are the pinks and the hot pinks, the darker pink, and then the purples are where you either have kind of slopes that might have some instability or some erosion potential there. So this map isn't intended to show all areas of landslide. It certainly probably doesn't do that, but just to highlight that these are areas that you currently are tracking, and that the changes in precipitation that are projected to see in the future are likely to increase landslide risk in the future. So just highlighting that we know this is a current issue, and that if the precipitation changes with heavier storms, particularly if that, as John mentioned, does happen in the form of rain, that some of these existing hazards could worsen over time. Okay, I'm going to switch back to John to address sea level rise.
So promised you would get back to sea level rise. This is kind of where we're sitting with the projections and kind of the model median, which is the 1 foot in 2050, 2 feet in 2080. Now this is just sea level rise alone. This does not include storm surge, which leads to some of the king tides that we've experienced. And I've got a picture later on, actually in the next slide, that can talk a little bit about what king tides mean, because we're seeing some of these impacts right now, especially during the winter times when we get the higher tides here in the Puget Sound region. So this is 1 foot of sea level rise and how it impacts kind of the region. And we've gone all the way out kind of in almost to the other side of La Conner, just to kind of show kind of your excess. This is 1 foot. The green area means that the area is low lying, but not directly exposed. So this is based on 1 foot over the current mean high water. So the average high water for each daily during the winter. And then if you press the button again, Katie, it worked. Little technology. I don't do animations often, but this one needed it. So this is 2 feet of rise, and now you see more of that area inundated. So the blue areas show kind of relative water depth over mean high water, with those low-lying areas still being identified, especially up there by Sharp's Corner and going across through the ridge there where Highway 20 is. So these are the kind of projections we're kind of thinking about. We will also consider the storm surge for the area, which can get up to an additional 3 feet. So if you think about these numbers and add 3 feet and go look at the tide gauge and look at the mean high water mark, you can start seeing a relative elevation. If you're into datums, and I won't get into datums, but if you have questions, please ask me. It's very important when you're actually working on coastlines and looking at your marinas and your infrastructure, where that water is going to be relative to where you're building something or where you have something built. So right now, I'd be curious to talk. I think it was Sandy that mentioned there was a sea level rise charrette. That's new information for me. Would love to have a chat with you a little bit more about what the outcomes were that and how it might impact other islands. This is also something that Todd, we recognize impacts cultural resources and is a quote unquote loss as those things get inundated more and more. So sea level rise is important, and it's also the one thing that we've been looking at for a long time. And just before I show the next slide, I just want to put out there that we do talk about climate change data a lot. We show a lot of impacts and things happening in the future. These things are going to happen in the future. We know it. We're sitting here today talking about it. And when I talk to my colleagues around the country, one of the things they point out is doing this comprehensive plan and putting the climate into it is such a key element to being prepared for the future. We're thinking about it now. We're looking at 20 to 30 years down the road when these impacts will happen. So that means we're looking ahead a couple generations just for us to say, hey, we're thinking about this in our land use mapping. I think it may seem like it's a lot of work, but it's a lot of work to do now, and it's really important. And we can still have those impacts, but we can definitely lessen the impact of those the climate impacts, the impacts to us, the impacts to our cultural resources, the impacts to our natural resources too. And let's jump to the next slide so I can just give you the picture's worth 1,000 words. You should recognize Highway 20. I did not take this picture. I do not take pictures when I'm driving down the road, especially on a flooded street. But luckily for us, that the MyCoast, which tracks kind of king tides and pictures of king tides, someone did take a picture as they were going down Highway 20. Tried to give you the dry side picture too from Google Maps. Again, even if I'm driving on the dry, I'm not going to take a picture. I do go down Highway 20 very often, know this area really well. And we were all looking for something to say, we think the water is going to hit that. So this is kind of an important feature Highway 20 is important. It's outside of your control. WashDOT doesn't list Highway 20 yet as a vulnerable. I've actually talked to a few folks at WashDOT and said, hey, what's going on with Highway 20? Because we do a lot of climate work for WashDOT, so we were able to have those discussions about them updating where their vulnerabilities are. And this last king tide in 22, and there was another good one in 23, really helps. So the king tides are those times in the year when the tides are statistically higher than what's predicted by NOAA, right? And in some cases, that could be up to additional 3 feet over what's prediction, and that's what was happening here. So that mean high water plus the tide and another 3 feet washes over Highway 20. And the next slide. One of the tools we'll be sharing with you and using, and we're just finishing up getting all the data in there and kind of checking it, is what's called a climate vulnerability map. The darker the color, the more vulnerable the area is to climate change. And that is kind of a collection of all those different impacts we've talked about: precipitation, heat, sea level rise, and what am I forgetting? Precipitation, heat, sea level rise, and there's one more, but I'll think of it later. The drought conditions. What we can do with this map is we have all this data loaded up, and it gives us a relative sense. What we do is we take the amount of the climate impact, we look at the sensitivity of the population. The sensitivity is kind of their health disparities, including mental health. This is where we look a little bit at mental health, and it's mental health stress that's been kind of documented for that area. And we just have to acknowledge that that's just what's been recorded, not what may be happening on the ground. And we'd like to hear from folks what's happening on the ground, including also in that is the area's adaptive capacity. In other words, what's the socioeconomic factors that allows people to adapt or change their condition, right? So lower income populations have a lower adaptive capacity. Housing type, houses built earlier in the century, which is pretty plentiful up here in the Western Washington, but also the different types of housing, such as manufactured homes, mobile homes, and RVs are also included kind of in that housing type. So that's the adaptive capacity along with income, and we can get a good sense of how vulnerable is that population to those different impacts. And that gives us this mapping exercise. And once this map's ready, you can click on any one of these census blocks, and you can get a whole kind of dashboard of all the different variables that are included in there. All the numbers that you saw on our charts that are in bold are the numbers we're using to kind of do that statistic. We can weight it differently. We can also increase, if we want to look at the higher risk potentials for that. Normally we'll come back and do a risk assessment for each of these census blocks, understand what the risks are, look at that low probability, higher risk condition, especially along the waterfront, especially in areas where there's extreme heat, or if we're looking at wildfire near the community forest, but also looking at kind of the impacts to the population as a whole. And that's where we kind of bring in a lot of that information, whether there's a high case of asthma, elderly populations. A lot of times we'll find that we've mapped out a lot of the community service centers, senior centers, schools, churches, things like that too. So we have a sense of what's going on in that census block, because sometimes it's nice to break it down to that smaller chunk. But also acknowledging that some census blocks are much larger because the populations are lighter. So we want to look at what's going on within those larger census blocks, especially in more rural areas or where there's less housing density, so we can understand, like, what are some populations? Is there something within that area that we should be alerted to, like a senior center, which may be more difficult to evacuate during a wildfire, or maybe more difficult to evacuate if there's flooding issues, things like that. So we do try to ground truth it enough. A number of us visit Anacortes, so we know what we're looking at. We don't kind of understand the layout of the land and what's going on. So we'll see a lot of that kind of concept. And then once we get this up and running and you're able to look at it, there's actually a place where you can just drop little pins and make comments. You can see on the upper right where it says project team comments, that can be dropped in and you can write a description there. And I'm always willing just to listen, talk through the map, and just have kind of a good conversation about what might be going on within that area. So with that, I think our next slide is kind of the question slide.
Yeah. So now time to I know that was a lot of information, but these are some additional questions that we had for you, but also just opportunity to discuss Did you catch anything that might not have been fully considered in that analysis that we've done? Are there local populations that we really need to hone in on as we start to work into that climate vulnerability piece? Yeah, Marlene.
I just want to go back to the wildfire risk and understanding that, looking at a risk assessment, that a major wildfire on Fidalgo Island could be lower probability, yet it would be very high impact. So in doing those risk assessments, I think it's really important to consider fire danger. And if you look, I teach fire-wise landscaping, fire resilient landscaping for master gardeners. And if you look at the report on that Lahaina fire and also some of the other fires in British Columbia, evacuation routes is really it's so important. We live on an island, and it goes back to those, like you mentioned, the bridges. But I just want to bring that up about evacuation routes and wildfire based on what I'm reading.
That's a great point, and I would actually love to offer, if we have a fire chief as part of this group, is if there's any specific kind of follow-up to that that we might want to add here versus me jumping in. If you don't mind being put on the spot.
No, but I missed kind of part of the specific of the question, though. I'm sorry. About evacuation in general, or specifically, I mean?
I think just the question was just sort of pointing out that the fire risk is real sort of on the larger Fidalgo Island in general, that the intensity can be really there, and that the challenge around evacuation routes being constricted by those kind of bridge access points is a real consideration for Anacortes. Just wanted to allow you an opportunity to kind of speak to that and how this climate element should be considering approaching that and coordinating. Really, I think the question is what kind of next step coordination do we want to do around wildfire risk here?
Yeah, so that's a big topic here. Just in closer to home, just beyond the comprehensive plan. But our wildfire risk, it's as far as evacuation from the island, most of our risks are pretty isolated. I mean, the chance there's the way that our topography lays out and the way that our neighborhoods lay out, the chance of a conflagration affecting multiple areas at once is pretty small, but not impossible. So yeah, I agree. Every neighborhood, as part of our general education, we talk about home safety and things like that, but we haven't really educated the public on evacuation routes. I think that would certainly be a worthwhile endeavor.
Let's get back to the slide we were on for questions.
Marlene, I think that's a great point. And one of the things is there's a lot of great lessons learned, not only from Lahaina, but also from the Marshall Fire in Superior, Colorado. Some of the fires that have impacted developed areas less than just the kind of wildfires out in the forested, less lower population density areas, and what happens with how communities are built, what's built, and how houses are kind of laid out in those communities are actually some of the findings too to kind of consider as we move forward on this. We're a little bit different than the lowlands of Colorado or Eastern Washington, but we've been looking at some of this information for some communities we're working with in Eastern Washington.
We can get into a little more detail on this as we go, but the other rationale for bringing it in, I sort of touched on this, but there may be some requirement changes for home building for new homes or retrofitting existing homes for home hardening that comes with that. And I think that's where kind of thinking about vulnerable populations is really key. Are those going to be cost prohibitive if new regulations are in place to require those, or that kind of vegetation management around homes to reduce wildfire risk? How does that overlay with your existing critical areas? So there's both the kind of risk considerations, and then there's also what is the mitigation, not necessarily the impact of the mitigation, but how can the city kind of lay the groundwork for making sure that the implementation of the mitigation for that is easier over time.
I just want to note on a time check that we have 12 minutes, I believe, is what we had scheduled to 7 o'clock. So
yeah, we're kind of pinching the time we had on to kind of cover the greenhouse gas piece. So maybe a time check on, I don't want to take extra time for people, but recognize there's a lot to cover here. Do we want to kind of stick with resilience for tonight? Or do you want to kind of take more time? You have access to the presentation, take more time to consider and maybe send some information via email in terms of feedback, and have us kind of touch base on the greenhouse gas tonight. What are folks feeling? Yeah, Carolyn.
Can you remind us how much time we had scheduled for our next, for the rest of the meeting?
Going till 7, so we have 10 minutes left.
Right, but I mean, how long were we gonna spend on greenhouse gases? I don't remember the agenda from the beginning.
Yeah, it was only gonna be 10 to 15 minutes, just an opportunity to kind of see who do folks attend the meeting or watch it online. And then if there were any questions of, really, we were just trying to get at, is there any key information you guys would need or you all would need from us to set us up for starting to talk about goals and policy foundation at the next meeting. So what kind of making sure we're providing you between today and the next meeting the right information. So that was kind of the key part of covering that tonight. I'm also happy to stay a little long, but I really want to be respectful of everyone's time and don't want to, I know everyone has busy evenings, so I don't want to assume everyone can.
Well, I don't see any other, I mean, I'm not trying to discourage hands going up for questions, but if there aren't any right now on this, then we could certainly follow up. Maybe we could spend the last 10 minutes on greenhouse gases and not go over time.
Absolutely. One piece that are just emerging, and we'll be talking more about this, you'll see more of this to just introduce is, the Anacortes community forest lands are really emerging as kind of a unique area in the climate element for the reasons around wildfire that we talked about, also because it's just a really, really wonderful natural resource. It's we looked at the recent forest management plan, and it does appear to be kind of in a stable stage from that most recent forest management plan. But ongoing monitoring is obviously key. But it's doing a really good job kind of insulating and protecting a lot of current other natural ecosystem resources that you have in the community. And so it will be kind of a focus, I think, and it also was noted in the greenhouse gas emissions, a somewhat notable local carbon sink for Anacortes. So there's a lot of sort of interesting kind of things coalescing around Anacortes community forest lands, and I think we're going to be talking a little bit more, or we will be talking more about that, and some probably likely policies related to that as we move forward. I just wanted to highlight that. And also I wanted to just highlight here that we have been looking at the kind of vulnerability work that the tribes have been doing, particularly the most recent Samish vulnerability study. Todd, I know this is not giving this enough airtime, so it's included in the presentation. We are looking at it. Sorry this is coming so late in the presentation, but happy to work with you and bring this more fully in. But there's a really wealth of information in that document and something we're taking really seriously as we're carrying this forward. So I will turn it back to John to just touch base really quickly on the kind of overview of the greenhouse gas inventory.
And this will be quick because I am not a greenhouse gas person. I'm a resiliency person. I just kind of know enough to be dangerous on this. Basically, this was gone over by my colleague Beth at the last city council meeting. Building, energy, and transportation kind of weighted to the top. Transportation includes passenger cars, freight, waterborne navigation, which includes the ferry system, and we are taking a little closer look at the ferry and how ferries are fueled, and then also airplanes from your local airport. And you can see at the kind of on the right-hand side of that, where it says agricultural, forestry, and land use, there's your carbon sink, which is the Anacortes community forest. And we also look at imported emission, which is your consumption. What are you buying and bringing into the community? So your goods, like your furniture, clothing, things like that. So we call this the consumption side. This is what you're buying and using. Food is another one. Food waste and food emissions are one thing to look at as far as long term, and there are some measures and strategies for that. Katie, why don't you jump to the next slide? And this is what we call a wedge diagram. So this kind of basically takes into account all the policies that are both state and regional and national to reduce greenhouse gases, and then where we can look at opportunities to reduce greenhouse gases from a local perspective. And what we'll do is we'll look at different actions that can be taken to reduce greenhouse gases. We scale those to see how much it will reduce greenhouse gases within Anacortes based on your inventory that we just completed, and see if we can change any of these bars that go down here. All these are assigned based on the bars you saw in the last chart. So the green is to transportation, and the blues are the building and energy. And you can see electricity goes down because of the kind of decarbonization of the energy grid, including your energy provider, Puget Sound Energy. Natural and gas, propane still stay as kind of a stable greenhouse gas emitter. So that's one opportunity. And then all of your waste and your refrigerants are way down there at the bottom. So very small percentage of it. A big chunk of that transportation goes down when the ferries switch all over to electric over the next 20 to 30 years. So with that, we're off to another question slide.
Yeah, so the goal of really presenting this today was really just to actually be helpful to see a show of hands of folks who either saw the presentation live or have watched it online, and that's not meant to be calling anyone out, just as to our understanding. That recording is available and we can send it out so folks have easy access. Yeah, Carolyn, go ahead. Oh, you're muted.
So, yeah, I actually, sorry, I was just raising my hand because I did watch it.
It doesn't count.
So yeah, so good that many of you have seen it, understand, the folks may not. We will send out the link so folks have easy access to the recording, but it does a really good comprehensive job at presenting it. We knew it was just to get through both of these in our first meeting was just way too much, so we wanted to split them up that way. But we are going to, at the next meeting, need to start to be talking about kind of both simultaneously as we start to think about how we are shifting into goals and policies, and we'll be thinking about that as we are refining our schedule. So tonight, what it would be really helpful to know is for those that have watched the presentation, what information do you feel like you would need to start thinking about goals and policies, and not kind of drafting stage, but really thinking about setting up for that kind of discussion around goals and policies between now and the next meeting? Yes, Warren. Oh, you're muted.
The issue was kind of raised to an extent at the meeting. And I think, of all the areas that we're going to be looking at here on these things, which of these things are clearly things that need to be taken care of at the state or perhaps county level, and which of these things are things that we can affect or ought to be looking at affecting on a local level, because I don't think we should be spinning our wheels on something that's like whether there's going to be new natural gas hookups or whatever, which is, to my mind, pretty much a state mandated thing or state issue. But what things can we do locally that are going to address these issues?
Good point.
Yeah, Warren, that's something we will help with quite a bit, as we call it scaling. We'll scale those actions to both the regional, state, and local level and see where you can get the, for lack of a better term, biggest bang for your buck at the city level. And yes, there are things that work better at the county and state level.
Yes, Marlene.
I noticed in the greenhouse gas presentation that the community forest contributed a positive of like 5% to the overall greenhouse gas. It was a benefit. But my question is, if we had a stronger tree policy in our urban area, interspersed in our residential and commercial areas, how much could we move the needle positively to on greenhouse gas? How much could local trees sequester gas, greenhouse gas, if we a comparison with a similar sized community that has a good tree canopy?
Great question. We aren't able to or prepared to answer that, but that's information we can get. I'm going to venture a guess that it's certainly not, a significant portion, a huge portion, given all the other competing needs for the area. Although that is a guess, maybe I shouldn't estimate that. So I'll step that one back. I'll leave that to Beth and Parametrics to lead on that, but we will happy to provide more information on that.
Well, the other benefit would be temperature, cooling temperatures with more of a canopy.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think that is, yeah, there's a lot of pieces in the policies where they talk about kind of co-benefits and mutual benefits, so not, when we get to the kind of measures, and comments is providing a lot of guidance, so one thing I pointed out at the greenhouse gas presentation that I'll also point out for this group, there's a lot of guidance for the type of policies that we can go to, and we can tailor those to Anacortes to meet those specific needs, but we don't need to, getting back to like the idea of we don't need to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of guidance on things that we can get to once we have a really robust picture of what our vulnerabilities are. So there's a lot of guidance for that. But we will provide more details on the forest research there. Yeah, Carolyn.
So the couple slides we breezed through, I know we have like 1 minute left, but could you like pop back to those real quick so just I can have them in my head of what
the greenhouse gas ones?
No, prior to that. The one we were kind of giving short shrift to the keep going.
The Sammamish.
Yeah. Okay, so that was the climate vulnerability, this one. And we'll dig into that more, you were saying?
Yes, and we can, well, we're looking at these and kind of and counting for them into kind of more robustly. So as we are, a good way to describe it is as we start to compare the assets and the hazards, some of these key points can be noted in that to say, this population is really seeing that, so it can come out in that detail level. The wetlands being the most vulnerable climate habitat in the region is another one jumped out, really key piece there. There's a lot of really important things. Todd, your hand's up. I need to stop talking and let you talk.
No, that's okay. I was just going to say, if anybody's really interested in digging into this, if you just, Google Samish Indian Nation and then go to the departments tab to natural resources, the banner on the right where you can click all of our climate adaptation and vulnerability work. If folks are interested in taking a peruse through that. The other thing I was just going to suggest is recently, I forget if it was from the infrastructure or the Inflation Reduction Act, but there was a large pot of money that came out called the CPRG, the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant. And the end product of that was something that was called a Priority Climate Action Plan report. And I know the state of Washington did one. And it might be interesting just to take a look at some of those key things that are identified statewide and see if any of those jump out as something applicable in Anacortes, and then being able to sort of link the work that we're planning on doing here to the greater region.
Great suggestion.
So I just wanted to toss that out there. And there's anyone who had that grant is now having to do a second portion of that. And I forget what acronym they use for that report, but it's sort of refines that and talks about action steps. So there's quite a bit of work being done on the state level around this as well that might be informative.
That's
Comprehensive Climate Action Plan is the next step in a lot of.
Yeah. Okay.
That's being handled regionally by PSRCP, and Puget Sound Clean Air are actually writing the one for the Puget Sound. So the one that would actually impact Anacortes would be done by Puget Sound Clean Air.
Yeah, and we were a recipient of that grant, but really our biggest identification was energy use in our buildings. So we're looking at retrofitting with solar and stuff like that to try and reduce our impact. But, where we didn't have our own reservation and we're not dealing with like waste management and things like that. But anyway, there might be some interesting synergies there.
I know we're 2 minutes over time, so I really want to be giving everyone their evenings back. I'm just leaving you on this slide just so you have a sense of kind of where we're headed. We are, our marching orders right off the bat where we really need to take a closer look at schedule and kind of take a closer look. So that's a key takeaway from today. But these are the things that are scheduled or kind of on the radar of about to be scheduled from here. So open house on the 23rd, we'll make sure that date is out to everyone in email so you can reserve calendars. We'd love to see you. You're going to be seeing similar stuff, but hopefully slightly pushed or will be slightly pushed forward based on tonight's meeting and some interactive elements to kind of share this with a broader population or broader community, excuse me. There'll be probably some follow-up meetings with staff, and we need to kind of identify those to make sure we're kind of ground truthing and coordinating with staff along the way. interviews. We want to see kind of who attended tonight to have a sense of, so we might need less of that because we've had a really wonderful showing from staff, and I appreciate everyone who's sitting in and listening in on this meeting. So you might need to take less of your time as a result, but I just want to make sure we're keeping everyone apprised of how this is moving forward. There are likely some interviews with the greenhouse gas emission sub-element coming up to kind of fill in key parts and start to make sure we're hearing from those key groups. And then, you know, we haven't set dates for these. I'm hearing also as our schedule rethink to get these on the calendars as soon as possible. We had thought of kind of key points for the CPAD in November and then January, and then attending some planning commissions in February, March, but we need to take a closer look and make sure, and maybe there's a need for a fourth meeting in there. So take that with a little bit of grain of salt until we follow up on that. And with that, I just want to say thank you. This has been a wonderful discussion. I know it's a hard topic, but I find takes so much good spirit in terms of people really digging in and wanting to provide a plan for it to help reduce some of these impacts. So thank you for taking the time today out of your evening to have this conversation with us.